Hi, my name is Courtney Terry, and this is Arts Alive. My guest today is David Holmes. He has been a language arts teacher at Dunaway Middle School here in town for over 16 years at this point.
Yeah.
And he's also a regular on the library's poetry nights. And most recently, he is the author of his own book of poetry, Poems from the River, the Classroom, and Other Sacred Places. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
Yay. Yeah. Well, I'd like to jump right in and get started, and I'm hoping you wouldn't mind reading one of your poems from the book with us.
Okay. Yeah, so I divided this into 3 sections, and I'm a fisherman, and this is about a river that I used to fish when I was a kid all the time. So it's called Childhood River. Fly rod in hand, I walk upstream in search of something lost on the Tilton River. The familiar river of my childhood, carving new paths through glacial rock. Natural courses changing through cycles of flood and drought. I stand against the flow alone. My dad held my hand here so I wouldn't stumble. My friend used to wade these waters with me, braced against the downstream force. The currents of cancer have swept him from this world, but the whisper of his laughter remains. I left these waters seeking greater game, larger fish in wilder places, traveling to blue ribbon trout streams. Today, I search for the soul of a tow-headed boy in shorts and tennis shoes, who remembers the joy of casting to small, less finicky prey, and still knows how to find pleasure in simplicity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love this book, and I especially love how you split it up into those 3 different sections of and referring to them as sacred places. And I love in your author's note how you say how you've, started to seek out and find sacred places and to look for the sacred places kind of in everyday things and everyday situations.
Yeah.
And so what was it, I guess, so the sacred places here are the river and the classroom.
Right.
In terms of your starting to write poetry and where your inspiration come from, which one of those sacred places would you say started you?
Well, I would have to say it was the classroom, but the classroom as an adult. So had a wonderful program through the Oregon Writing Project that was teachers as writers. And, I never really thought of myself as a writer. I wrote in a journal or whatever, but I had to do a project for this class, and I wrote about this experience with my grandfather and him passing away, and I finished it, and there are people in the room crying, and if you read this, their grandparents appear a lot in this book, and I thought, wow, maybe I can write. And so I actually took several more classes through my master's program, and then through the Oregon Writing Project, and really kind of sprung from that one experience that I thought I can do something that is worth publishing or worth putting out there in the world. So. And then I'm just going to give you a plug, and the McMinnville writing community is amazing. The events and Mike and the poetry writing groups that get together has really pushed me down that path towards writing this, which was really incredible.
That's fantastic. And so was that so you're a language arts teacher, and so was part of that program because you were a language arts teacher, or just because you had the interest in the way the project?
So I finished college a little directionless, and actually finished as a social studies education major, and had thought about going into language arts, but if I'm honest, I chose social studies because I needed a few less classes to complete that degree.
True enough.
And then later in life, when I went to get my master's, I went to get a language arts. And so some of those classes were just offered to teachers in general, to improve writing skills in the classroom, regardless of what subject you teach. We've embraced that here in McMinnville, is that writing is important, whether you're in language arts, math, or a science class, or whatever it is. So, and then it's just kind of snowballed from there. So here I am. Yeah.
Glad you're here.
Thanks.
Well, and I love in the book and in your poetry just in general how you have these kind of two very different, well, different to me, but maybe you can go into it more of kind of inspiration where you're on the river, you're out in nature, like it's a very different environment than a middle school classroom.
Yeah.
And how does the inspiration, I guess, is it a different type of inspiration? Do you think of classroom poems when you're on the river and vice versa?
I would say that I tend to write more river poems while I'm on the river and more classroom poems. So river poems get written in the summertime. But it's interesting because I had a fellow teacher go, "Wow, I've never thought of the classroom as sacred," and I think the thought of my classroom as sacred really comes from my responsibility to my kids. That somebody has put their child's, not their life, but a big part of their life into my hands, and it's my job to make that experience the best, most positive, most productive experience that I can for them. And I absolutely love teaching, love the kids that come across my path. And so I would say in the classroom, it's more a sacred responsibility than it is, just standing in awe of this river cathedral.
Yes.
Yeah. So it does change tone quite a bit there. Yeah.
And then especially I've noticed your poems about the classroom, I mean, they kind of go from just joy of teaching and the joy of connecting to kids, but some of the poems that I've heard from you are very impactful, and they're very, a lot of time they're like pleas, they're talking, reaching out to the kids or describing how, a kid may be struggling and how you see that, and just the range of emotion that goes from, how you feel about these kids every day. It's really amazing. And saying that, as I think your classroom poems have probably made me cry the most. Sure. The river poems are beautiful, and it does bring to mind like the recognizing the sacred spaces when you're in them. But just that kind of dichotomy of classrooms can be wonderful places, but you also see some really hard things, especially with your students, and that so comes through in your writing. And have you, poetry would be a good coping mechanism for that, I feel.
Yeah, very much. So, for instance, one of the poems that's in here is a 7th grade class, and I talk about several of the different people that I see in that class. I love my job. I love teaching, but there are times I go home and cry. And it can be heartbreaking, but I had an experience. The kid that gave me the biggest run for my money, and I never really thought I got through to him, came back 2 years later, and I didn't even recognize him because his face was so much like he was hard as a 7th grader. And 2 years later, and he was a sophomore, so maybe it was almost 3 years later, his face was soft. Like he had changed so much, and he literally came back and said, sorry I was so hard on you. It was a tough time in my life, and you stuck with me. We cried.
Oh, wow, yes.
But, and as a teacher, you don't know. and there, you get 90 minutes a day to make a difference in their life, and so that time is incredibly valuable.
That's amazing. And we've talked about the river and the classroom, and then as we get to the end of the interview, I'm hoping you could read one more poem from the other sacred places. I'm partial to it just because it has my favorite animal in it, one of my favorite animals in it. Would you mind reading that particular poem?
No,
Thank you.
Not at all. I love this poem. It's called Vulture Spring, and it was inspired by a library, write a spring poem, and it was weird to write about vultures, but because I probably just happened to see one that day. But so it's called Vulture Spring. Spring is when the vultures come, harbingers of death riding warm currents as Mother Earth thaws. Daffodils poke out sunny faces and rivers run high and muddy. Green upon green fields birth new crops. Even as turkey vultures circle blue skies, blotting out the sun with their erratically tilting wings. The chaos of life erupts, and winter's hold loosens. Plants grow through cracks in the concrete, seeking life-giving soil. New life is fragile, and in the tumult of rebirth, some are lost. Not all who survive winter reawaken strong. Spring is when the vultures come.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for indulging me on that.
I love that. I've had several people say this is my favorite poem, but I got to tell you, you are the first one that has picked Vulture Spring. So thank you very much.
Oh, sure. I like to help out the vultures out there. I feel like.
They are underappreciated.
Thank you. Yes. And if folks were looking to purchase a copy of your book, where might they find it?
So not many places.
That's okay.
Well, you can email me. I don't know if we'll be able to put this at flyfishdave50@gmail.com. If you type in the whole title, you can get a Kindle or Amazon electronic copy. And you can buy it at Seifert Winery, but I think they only have 2 copies left.
Okay, so 2 of you out there can go and get it from that winery. Yeah. And any plans for any more books of poetry right now?
So, I have 2 ideas, and I've been doing some writing, and one is called, the working title that probably won't be the final title, is Poems to Make You Squirm. And just some really, tough questions that I think we need to ask. I am working on some sailing poems because that's the new event in my life. I planning to cut lines and set sail this next year and be gone for several years on my boat, and so that is just starting because I think for me I have to experience something deeply before I can write good poetry about it. So
you have so many adventures on the way.
I do. It's very exciting. So
thanks. Well, thanks again, David Holmes, for being our guest on Arts Alive. Again, as we mentioned, he is the author of the book Poems from the River, the Classroom, and Other Sacred Places. And David, thanks again for being a guest today and for coming in.
Thank you very much.
And hopefully see you at one of our poetry nights soon.
Very much looking forward to that. So.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Courtney.